Hello, my most amazing artists. Today you're going to be using earthenware clay to make a cupcake out of that clay. It's going to go into the kiln and become ceramic, something that you can keep forever and even store things in because it's going to be like a little box. The bottom of it, we even have a silicone mold that will be able to peel off. That way you get the shape and the texture of a cupcake wrapper. So we're going to start out by making a pinch pot for the bottom, and then the top is going to be made out of a coil. So if you know how to make a pinch pot and if you know how to make a coil, then you're going to be able to make this cupcake pretty easily. But we do have to follow some steps. So the first step is grabbing one of your 2 cubes of clay and rolling it into a sphere. You might have to press it down a little bit on your tray or roll it in your hands in order to get it into that sphere shape. So I'm rolling it back and forth between my hands with a lot of pressure. That's going to eventually make it into a sphere. I keep my hands flat so that way it rolls it into that ball. A sphere is just a term for 3D ball. Then I'm going to dive my thumb in to make a belly button into that sphere, and I'm going to make sure that I go all the way down to the bottom but not through. Then I take my pincher fingers and I'm going to pinch the sides. That's why it's called a pinch pot. I get out those pincher fingers and I go around and around until I have a little pinch pot. Then I'm going to go ahead and get some water if it's not so smooth. If the clay starts cracking, it's going to need a little bit of water to smooth it out. I just dip my fingers into the cup of water to make a little bit of a slippery texture on the clay. Then I can put my silicone mold or the cupcake bottom onto the bottom of my pinch pot. I'm going to now do that same thing where I pinch both sides with my thumbs on the inside and my other fingers on the outside. That way I can really mold this cupcake shape and texture to my clay cupcake. The silicone mold or that little cupcake wrapper is not going to be able to go in the kiln with the cupcake. We're going to take it off after these like to dry a little bit. This clay does dry very quickly, so you want to make sure you don't overwork it because the moisture is going to be evaporating constantly. Your hands are sucking up all of the water out of the clay, so the more you play with it, it's going to get harder and harder to work with. Then I do something called the pinky test. I want to make sure that my clay rim of my cupcake is no thicker and no thinner than my pinky. So as long as it's pinky size, it's good to go. But I don't want it to be hanging over the edge. So I'm using my clay knife. It could also be like a popsicle stick to cut off the edges here. So I'm just using that flat tool to cut off the edges and get it so that it's closer to that wrapper size. I don't want it to be too big or hanging over the edges. I just want it to be around that same size. I'm going to get a little bit of water on my fingers and then smooth out any cracks around that rim of my cupcake top or the wrapper. Then I'm going to make sure that it's pinky thin or the size of my pinky, so pinky test it. Make sure it's that same size all the way around as best as you can, and maybe flip it over every once in a while to flatten it out. I'm going to pick up my writing tool or my detailing stick here to carve my initials into the bottom lightly. I don't want to poke through the clay all the way to the bottom, but I just want to put my initials, my first letter of my first name and my first letter of my last name. That way I know it belongs to me. Now I can start on the icing with my second ball of clay. I'm going to roll that into a long coil for the icing. So I'm starting out by rolling it on the table or my tray, and then I can pick it up and roll it in my hand so I get a nice even coil. After I get it to pinky size, which is going to take some work, I'm going to have to roll it out evenly on sides. I might even have to shorten it so I can fit it into my hands to roll it into the air because that might be easier than rolling it onto the table. So no thinner than the width of your pinky and no thicker because you don't want your clay to be too thick because then it won't dry all the way through. If I need to, if its clay is cracking, I can get a little bit of water on my finger and smooth it out. And then I'm going to take the bottom of my cupcake and start to coil or wrap my coil around, round and around in a way that looks like icing. Smaller and smaller as I went towards the inside, I need to add on another coil. If I need to attach something, I have to do something called scratch and attach or score and slip. Slip is just watery clay. It's like a clay glue. When I use my toothbrush, it scratches the clay with a little bit of slip or water, and that glue then attaches it when I attach it with the other side. So always make sure you use a toothbrush to scratch and attach, or you could also score and slip, and I'll show you that in another little area somewhere. But right now, scratch and attach. So I scratch both sides to create like a clay Velcro. That texture on both sides makes them stick together and not fall apart. Because even if your clay sticks right now, it might later fall apart when it starts to dry or goes in the kiln. Then on the inside of my cupcake, I'm going to smooth things out. So I'm going to take my thumbs on the inside and smooth that out so it all sticks together. Because otherwise my coils would just fall apart if I didn't actually attach them. But of course I wouldn't want to smooth the outside because I still want it to look like swirly icing. So on the inside is where I'm smoothing it out and using a little bit of extra clay. So if I have extra clay, I can take that and make it into like a clay glue by adding some water on my fingers, taking a little pinch of clay for my extra clay, and smoothing out the insides. The outside, I still want to look like icing, but oh no, what did I just do? Please make sure you don't get frustrated and start over, because if you do start over, this is all the work you have to do. You can't just start over so easily. You have to do something called wedging the clay. You have to get out all the air bubbles, and right now when you get your clay, it doesn't have any air bubbles in it. It comes from a big block or slab of clay that has all of that air pressed out of it. But when you trap air in it, when you're playing with it with your hands and then you slam it over, it traps air in it, and you might not get all those air bubbles out. So you have to do something called wedging the clay, which is when you block it down onto your tray and you have to keep working it till it's all out. It takes a long time. So I do not recommend starting over unless there is an emergency, because you only have today to get this done so that we have enough dry time in between the firing in the kiln and then getting to paint them. So we need to make sure that the first time you're taking your time, if you have to, that is how you wedge the clay to get the air bubbles out, and you could potentially start over as long as you're using your time efficiently. But let's try to do it the first time. But I showed you how you could start over, and again, I made my coil. I got a little water on it because the clay does get harder to work with as it goes and sucks the moisture out of it. Your hands are sucking up all the water out of the clay. It gets drier and drier the more you play with it, scratching and attaching an extra coil on here, because maybe my icing was just too high before. I coiled it up too much. So this time I'm going to make it a little bit lower by just making sure that that swirl goes maybe around 3 times. And I do that by making sure it gets smaller and smaller on its way up, leaning on each other as it's getting built up to the top. At the top, I kind of pinch it so it looks like the top of the swirl right there where the icing would end. And then on the inside, I'll smooth it out. So now that I have my top and I kind of smooth out any cracks that I see, then I'm gonna flip it over and go on the inside and work it so that way those coils are attached on the inside. And I can do that by smoothing some of that clay down from the bottom, and I can even add some more clay in there to kind of build those walls and smooth them together. So this is a time where I'm not scratching and attaching, but I am using a little bit of clay glue, making that with some extra clay and some water on my fingers, and smoothing it all out on the inside so it builds it together into a top of my box. That way those coils don't fall apart and I don't have a risk of it breaking so easily in the kiln. So now that it's nice and solid and it's one piece and looks like icing, I can make sure that it fits onto the bottom of my cupcake so it works like a box. This is going to be the top or the lid. So I want to make sure that it does sit nicely on the top or the bottom of my cupcake. If it doesn't fit, like it's too big or too small, then that's a risk of breaking too. If you were to put something important in it and then put the lid on, but it fell off, it could break, because ceramic, it sounds like glass. You don't want to mess around with it. You want to make sure you build a nice sturdy base. I'm going to put my initials in the top. So now I have my initials in the bottom and the top so they don't get lost, and I always know which one's mine. The reason is because I am going to have these fired in the kiln as separate pieces. They're not going to be attached together. So even though I'm attaching them together now or just sitting it on top, I am going to have those apart when they're fired, so it's a lid and a bottom. Now I'm gonna make some details. If I have extra time, I can make something like a little cherry to put on top. I could put sprinkles. I could add all those things that we got to plan out. If you wanted a lemon slice, a lime slice, an orange slice, some chocolate bars, if you wanted to make it a s'mores cupcake and add a marshmallow and a chocolate bar and a graham cracker, if you had a unicorn cupcake and you're gonna add a unicorn horn, whatever it is, you can make it out of clay. As long as you know how to make a slab, which is just like a clay pancake, if you know how to make a coil, which is when you roll that clay into a snake, and if you know how to make a sphere, which we did when we made our pinch pot, then you can make anything out of clay. I'm making a strawberry by rolling a little ball or sphere of clay, pinching the sides to make it look more like a heart shape, and then I'll add the top of the strawberry like little beads. If you don't scratch and attach, making that clay Velcro with both sides textured so they stick together, then your thing might fall off and break later. So don't be upset if you don't scratch and attach. It's going to fall off. Even if it sticks now, it might not stick later. I can also carve details in with that clay tool right there. So with that stick, I can carve things in like the seeds of the strawberry. I could add details. If I was making a little character to stick on top, I could, and carve a face into it. This is where you could add the details like a drawing tool. Just like you would draw with a pencil, you can etch or carve into the clay to make those details too. But don't forget, you will be able to paint these after they come out of the kiln, so you don't have to do every single detail. Just the main ones that would be in the structure or the shape of things, the important textures and things like that. So for my strawberry, after I smooth things out, add the texture, now I can think about what else I might want to make. I made a key lime cupcake, so I'm going to make a lime by making a clay pancake. I started with a sphere, smashed it into a pancake, got it into that circle shape, but it's not too thin or it's going to stick to the table and break. And then I'm going to make it into that lemon, lime, orange, whatever it is. I can do that with my carving tool here. Then I can make it into that rim or the outside edge of that lime that's cut. I can carve those insides to show the fruit part of it, and then I can use the other side to cut it in half. I can use my clay knife to cut it in half. Now I have two pieces, and I'm gonna stick them. I could do one on this side, just like a little decoration or a decorative accent that's also edible, or I could do two because you know I love Disney and I had talked about maybe making a Mickey Mouse one, so I'm gonna stick these on as ears. You could do something like making ears of a cat or making ears of a dog or making unicorn ears, and it could be something edible like chocolate. Whatever it is, you could add gumdrops, you could add Skittles or M&Ms or whatever kind of crazy cupcakes you have in mind. You could carve the details in with that carving tool. It's going to really make it stand out and make your cupcake even more interesting if you add these details. Now, of course, this is if we have extra time. You want to make sure that you build your cupcake efficiently with that bottom and the top. That way you have the extra time to decorate. If you run out of time to decorate, you're just going to have to do your decorating when it comes to the painting time. But it would be cool if you add at least one thing to your cupcake, whether it's sprinkles, whether it's fruit, or if it is chocolate, something sweet on top. Make sure that you just scratch and attach both sides. Now this is called scoring when I use that sharp part of my carving tool to carve into it and make some texture. So if my toothbrush isn't making enough texture to make it stick, I can slip and score. Scoring is when you scratch into it with that little carving tool. Both sides, I kind of give it a wiggle to really make sure it's stuck together with that clay glue, and it's good. Now I'm going to scratch and attach the other side to attach my other ear. I don't know if it's going to be a lemon or a lime yet. Maybe I'll still stick with my key lime idea. Maybe I'll switch it to an orange. Most important thing is that you make sure that anything you add on to decorate is scratched and attached. Make sure you wiggle test it to know that it's not going to fall off. If you wiggle it now and it starts to fall off, it's going to fall off when it starts to dry. So make sure everything gets a little bit of a wiggle. If it doesn't start falling off, it's good to go. If it does, it needs a little bit more clay glue and scratching and attaching. Every once in a while, you're going to want to make sure that your top fits on your bottom and that the top didn't get too big and that the bottom didn't get too small for it, that it still fits. Now, if you want to, you could peel off the bottom of your cupcake after you do the top. That might have let enough time for that print to sink into your clay and really make it look like a cupcake wrapper. You don't have to peel it off today. You could leave your cupcake in there, or you could peel it off at the very end to see what it looks like and make sure everything is up to your expectations. I peeled it off because I'm going to add Mickey Mouse's buttons on the bottom of the cupcake. I had this idea where I was going to make 2 ears, and then I'm going to make those 2 buttons on the bottom to make it look like Mickey Mouse's pants. So I'm going to do that by scratching and attaching a couple ovals onto that bottom of the cupcake, which is why I needed to take off the wrapper. But if you want to leave the wrapper on, that's okay. You can let it dry in there a little bit longer to make sure it really gets that cupcake wrapper texture and looks awesome. I'm going to work on my ovals, and then I'm going to work on some sprinkles. Now, I'm really adding a lot of extra stuff to this cupcake. I would focus on maybe one decoration, whether that's a cherry or sprinkles or something on top. I would focus on one important one that you think you want to do the most, because you might run out of time. We have a lot to pack into a little bit of time. If you want to add sprinkles, you just roll a very, very thin coil. This is the only time you do not have to do the pinky test, because these sprinkles, it's okay if I lose a couple. I don't have to make sure they're all scratched and attached as long as I have a little bit of water on my fingers, and this clay is very thin and sticky and wet. So I'm making sure that I have water on my fingers as I roll out this little tiny coil. And after I have my little tiny coil, I'm going to use my little carving tool to use the tip or the point of it to kind of slice it. And I'm going to slice some sprinkles and just stick them right on my cupcake. Slice a sprinkle, stick it on my cupcake. I'm just going to repeat that step for a bunch of sprinkles all over my cupcake. Yes, some might fall off because I did not scratch and attach, but as long as it has water on it and I really stick it on there when I press it on, then most of them will probably stay. But don't be upset if you lose a couple. If you really want something to stay, you do need to scratch and attach. But something as small as a sprinkle, it's okay to just kind of stick it on there. And if I lose one, I'm not going to cry about it. It's going to be just fine because I've got a whole bunch of others I'm making. So I think I can call my cupcake complete. This is a masterpiece. I cannot wait to see what it looks like when it comes out of the kiln, and I can't wait to see what things you come up with today. Remember, this is your chance to design your own cupcake. You are not only an artist and a ceramicist or a clay artist, but you are also becoming a cupcake or food artist. So you want to make this look yummy, you want to make it look like it's good enough to eat, and really try your best on designing your own cupcake, just like you were in Cupcake Wars, where it is up to the cupcake artist and the food artist to design the best looking cupcake and coming up with a creative design, whether that's a video game theme, it could be a certain kind of food, it could all be themed to your favorite candy, whatever it is, try to make it more unique by adding something on top to decorate when you're done. If it's just a plain cupcake with that top swirl icing and the bottom, that's awesome too though. Whatever you create, I cannot wait to see it today. Have fun, artists, and all the extra clay, you want to make sure that you pick it all up with your extra clay. You can kind of stick it all over the clay mat or your tray and get it all lumped together. That extra clay needs to make sure it goes into my extra clay bag at the end of class, or put that ball of clay on your tray. Because if you put it home in your pocket and try to take some, it's just going to turn into dirt. It needs a kiln. You can't really keep it. It just turns back to dirt. And you want to make sure you get that dirt off your hands by using an art wipe. If you were to wash your hands in the sink with all this clay, it clogs the sink and then nobody will be able to use the sink. So please make sure you get most of it off with a wipe. You could even use the spray on your hands if you need to, hand sanitizer, and a wipe will do the trick to get most of the clay off before you have a bathroom break to wash your hands later. I'm going to say that my cupcakes are done. They have my initials carved on the inside. I'm good to leave them on my tray and go. Have fun, artists.